Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. And today I have as our guest a godless grandpa. Now, don't get confused. This is not my husband. Those of you who have been asking for a long time to see my husband, it's not going to happen. Has no interest in doing this kind of thing. But nevertheless, Stephen is a godless grandpa. And when I heard a little bit of his story, I thought it sounded fascinating. And so I wanted to talk to him. But before we get into his story, something really interesting about Stephen is his name. Uh, his name is Steven Meyers. Stephen, do you ever get confused with Steven Meyers of the Discovery Institute?
Yeah, I'm sure I do. Yes. I do post a lot on Facebook on anything the CSC puts out, and I'm sure they just read the first two words or three words and know I'm not that Steven C. Meyer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I was hoping when I posted the thumbnail indicating that that Steven Meyer was no longer a Christian, that someone might think that Steven Meyer of the Discovery Institute had seen the light and left the faith.
Well, he did. Yeah. So very late in life, yes.
Yes. So tell us about yourself. Start with your early background. What was your bringing up, and how did you get into Christianity and so forth?
All right, well, I could almost start with a prequel.
Okay.
Because the way my parents met just would set the whole stage for my life and my brothers. My dad was an only child, grew up in the Texas Panhandle, thought that being an only child was the cardinal sin, and especially when you don't even have neighbors. And he just always dreamed of a big family. My mother grew up in California. Her graduating class was bigger than my dad's town.
Mm-hmm.
She was the 14th of 17 children.
Wow.
And
wow.
One mother, one dad, and 17 children. And my mother got caught up in Pentecost in her mid-teens, probably.
The Pentecostal movement?
Yeah, the Pentecostal movement, yeah, absolutely. The speaking in tongues and the whole 9 yards. And by the time she was 15, she'd already decided that she wouldn't marry a man that wasn't saved and filled with the Spirit and called to the ministry, because she felt like she was called to the ministry. She sang, she played the guitar. And then my dad wanders into that church.
The churches I went to told women, we had no business even dating a man that wasn't saved, whether you wanted to be in ministry or not, that, you could end up unequally yoked if you dated a man that was unsaved.
I don't know if she was told that, but maybe she's the one that started all that, because she was already convinced that's what's going to happen. So the day my dad walked into that church, and I don't know why he did, he wasn't necessarily religious. His family was Church of Christ or Baptist.
In California?
Yes, in California. He was in the Marine Corps.
Oh, okay.
And stationed out in California. So he walks into that church and meets my mom, and I don't know if just the fact that he was smitten with her, which is something that happens a lot. People get into church, but anyway, he got into the Pentecostal movement just hook, line, and sinker. And once he met all the prerequisites that my mother held, they got married. She was 17, he was 21. They got a trailer. They hit the evangelistic field. In 51, they held their first revival in a little place called McLean, Texas.
Okay.
And that first revival went for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, they left that thinking they're about to set the world on fire.
Were they living off the offerings from that?
Yes, that's pretty much all they were living off of. How meager that was. But
Mhm.
and when he left that little town, he told my mother that, I feel so sorry for poor old Brother Green in this little bodunk town, just spinning his wheels. Of course, my
Mhm.
parents had a house with wheels, and they're gonna evangelize the world, and that would come back to bite him later. So my brother was born in California, out
Mhm.
in Kansas. My younger brother was born 15 months and 19 states later here in Texas. So, so that's how we came to be almost born again 9 months before we were saved. We were certainly going to church well before we were born.
Mhm.
Uh, when my little brother was born, they sold the trailer. They bought some furniture and bought a house. Well, actually moved into an old dairy barn in Pleasant Valley. And my dad started preaching in an old Oddfellows Lodge hall. There
Mhm.
was no running water at all. It was just a barracks. And
Wow.
matter of
And
fact,
this was in Texas, right?
I was in the Panhandle.
Okay.
Yes, it's outside of Amarillo.
And how many of you kids were there at this point?
3.
3.
Yeah,
Okay.
just the older and the younger brother. So, matter of fact, we had the outhouse there, the old wooden outhouse. One Sunday morning, I decided it would be a good idea to climb down in that dark hole and see what adventures were down there. And my
Oh
Sunday,
my.
yes, and
How
I
old
did.
were you?
I was maybe 4. I remember it. I'm thinking there's dinosaurs and lava and all kinds of neat things in this dark hole, and I should go explore it. And I got about right to here,
Uh-huh.
and I couldn't feel any place to put my feet, which might have been a good thing.
Yeah.
But I just started to panic, and
Mhm.
one of the girls from the church, a teenage girl named Sherry Duck, came out and rescued me out of the fate worse than death.
Yeah.
It was always a big story. I was probably the only person rescued from an outhouse by a duck, and
By a duck. Why do you call
by a
her a
duck.
duck?
Yeah, that was her last name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Her name was
that was
Duck?
her last name was Duck. Yes, and my dad got a Catholic sanctuary and moved it in beside the Oddfellows Lodge Hall.
Mhm.
Actually, let my brothers and I ride the church to its present position, and I'm sure that's where first of many times I was saved was in that church. Of course, especially during teenage years, because I was constantly committing adultery every time I saw a pretty girl, and
Mhm.
I'd have to repent and repent and repent, and so um, and it was Holy Pentecostal. We would have the interpretation of tongues and giving of tongues and a Jericho march where people would feel the Spirit and march around the inside of the church,
Mhm.
praying and bringing the walls down.
So this was a small church, correct?
Yeah, it was a small church,
Uh-huh.
right?
So you must have grown up fairly poor.
Oh yeah, we were terribly poor. My dad always had 2 or 3 jobs.
Oh,
He
okay.
did,
So
and
he worked
yeah,
other than just being a preacher.
well, he never had a church that supported him. I mean,
Oh, okay.
he was actually in the ministry because he was called to the ministry. That's what
Mhm.
he felt, and yeah, he wasn't in it for the money. That's for sure. But while we were there, I was over at the neighbor's house, swinging in their swing. Decided to jump on their house from the swing set, going
Mhm.
as high as I could go, and I didn't come close to getting on their roof. But when I came down, I broke my left elbow, and I broke it really bad. It was actually we were walking back to the house. My arm was swinging completely backwards,
Oh
and I
gosh.
don't remember it hurting, but I thought I was really impressed because my brothers were laughing, the neighbors' kids were laughing. The lady that was walking us back was about to pass out, I'm sure. And we got it set, and it was broke real bad. The doctors thought, I would never have just very very little movement with this arm.
Mhm.
And of course, there was so much prayer and over this, and we went to a
And God healed you.
Absolutely. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I broke it 3 times that summer because,
Wow.
well, they couldn't keep it set. That's what it was. It was still in the cast. And the doctor just told my parents that, I may have 10% movement in that arm. And, and at the revival, they called me forward. They anointed me with oil. They prayed the prayer of faith. And a few days later, I had the cast taken off, and they asked me if I could stretch my arm out, and I just stretched it all the way out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm 7 years old. I've got a testimony. I'm
Mm-hmm.
a living miracle, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I believed. The whole time, even though don't remember any of the doctor's reports or anything. This is what that's what I was told.
Right.
The whole
Right.
town was. And then later that year, we moved to McLean, where poor Brother Green had been pastoring for spinning his wheels for
Mm-hmm.
years and years. Then my dad started preaching at that church, and then my baby brother was born, and we spent a lot of our time out on the farm. We were preachers' kids are little angels or they're little devils, is
Mm-hmm.
what we've all heard. We were the angel category. We never broke curfew. No one in the house cursed. There was never alcohol or tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
We were spent all of our summer out on the farm hoeing cotton and picking cotton and running out the canyons, and didn't have toys or TV or telephone. Like not a single luxury.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a great time out on the farm. Had a lot of illustrated sermons where we watched the storm clouds come in and actually watch tornadoes form
Mm-hmm.
out on the edge of the Cap Rock. And once they got close enough, we'd all go to the cellar. But just the mighty power of God. We just saw God in all of nature.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My older brother and I helped my dad find the missing cow one time, and he got hit by lightning, and it was just scattered all over the place. And my granddad was commenting on just the mighty hand of God, the power of God, and how important it is for us to live a Christian life.
Or you'll get zapped like the cow.
Exactly. Yeah, we get $1 a day to hoe cotton.
If
And
only that cow had prayed more.
exactly. Yeah, it was like a burnt sacrifice. We
I was wondering if maybe there were some fried steaks there laying there where you found it.
No, there were no fried steaks. Yeah, but we got $1 a day hoeing cotton, and
Mm-hmm.
we went to the bank, and my granddad offered my little brother and I our $7, or we could take 2 bits. But what's 2 bits? I can't tell you. I'll pay you one or the other. And of course, my little brother, being the smarter of the two, he took the $7.
$7. Uh-huh.
Yeah, my granddad handed me a quarter and just said, "You don't need to be gambling." And yeah, well, that was a valuable lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And he did pay me the $6.75 later, but
Uh-huh.
he let me worry about that for a long time. But we had a great time growing up. I know a lot of times when you hear the story of the preacher's kids, and there's all kinds of scandal in the church, or they're just very domineering, and
Mm-hmm.
there really wasn't. My dad never raised his voice. He always said that if you had to raise your voice to your children, you didn't have them under control. And by God, Kelly, we were under control. We
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a little much.
I know exactly what you mean. Something that I observed in Fort Wayne at the zoo, was kind of astounding. I watched a Amish man let his children ride the merry-go-round, and when the merry-go-round was over, it stopped, and all the children just sat there. They didn't move, and the ride operator kind of looked at the dad like, "Are you going to get these kids off the ride?" And the dad said, "Up." And all 4 children got up and got
Beautifully,
off the ride. They were waiting for dad to tell them what to do.
right. Yeah,
Mhm.
it wasn't so much a tyrant. It was just, this is how we are. That's how you're supposed to be. I say that's how we were supposed to be. We would go to California every year. Needless to say, all my aunts and uncles and cousins were in California. Just hundreds of them, seems like.
Mhm.
But and they were pretty bratty. Some of my cousins were, and to the point that my uncles started sending their daughters to live with us in Texas for a whole
Mm.
summer,
Mhm.
and really turned them around. But at the same time, my dad he got along with my uncles really well. They were all, they all drank and smoked. They were all just sinners, but he wasn't just.
Sounds
They
like your
got along.
dad missed his calling. He
Yeah,
should have been a high school principal.
yeah, exactly. I remember one time my uncle, who was a bartender, actually, he was very wealthy. He owned a bar just so he had people to drink with,
Mhm.
and he spent the whole day because my dad would work all day, and he had to line up jobs so we could afford to go on vacation. So he would work and then usually hold a revival during one of the weeks, and the whole day he was working, my uncle was teaching my little brother how to make all these mixed drinks, how to make all these
Mhm.
cocktails, and when my dad got in that afternoon, uh, Joe would look over at my little brother and, well, why don't you go, make me a screwdriver? And Roger would run off, come back a little bit later with a drink. It took a little bit for my dad to realize what was going on.
Mm.
Yeah, instead of, like maybe some preachers would just be intimidated that somebody's trying to teach their child how to sin,
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
just had a big laugh about it. And that's kind of the person my parents were. They just, I'm sure they witnessed to
Take it you were not from a dry town.
we were from a drought town,
Oh, you
actually.
were from a dry town.
Yes.
So but where your uncle had the bar,
In
that was not.
California.
I'm
Yes,
sorry, what?
That was in California.
Oh, he was in California. Okay.
Yes, all,
Okay.
all my uncles were in California.
Okay. When I lived in Texas for 8 years from 1982 to 1992, and or 10 well, 9 years, I guess, 91 to 80 to 91, yeah. But anyway, and we lived in a dry town,
Mhm.
and the town voted to allow liquor by the drink at, restaurants while we were there, and, yeah, some of the pastors in town were just irate that the town was voting to allow liquor to be served in restaurants.
Right. No, our town was actually dry until just very recently, actually.
Mhm.
And I was surprised here a couple of years ago to find out that they sold beer in
Mm.
McLean.
Mhm.
Yeah, but no, out in California, it was completely different. So we started getting. One of my cousins came one year. She was 13. She was a little brat, and I think just of course, what we were told is, was she was saved and she's filled with the Spirit and she's a whole new creature in Christ, and I think a lot of it was just the fact that it was just such a change. She went from the city and went out to the farm the whole summer and just
Mhm.
saw a family that just enjoyed enjoyed life, being together, and I think that probably had more to do with it than anything. But then the next year we got three girl cousins. They came and lived with us, and of course they were all saved and filled with the Spirit, and suddenly my dad was pretty popular with all the aunts and uncles because he'd send back a daughter that was not nearly as bratty as they were before.
Mhm.
In '68, we had well, in '67 Christmas I got my first guitar.
Mhm.
Like every 10-year-old, I wanted to play it without having to sit down and learn how. So that summer, my brother had built a contraption from the basically a zip line from the treehouse down to the clothesline. And one night after revival, we had a quartet, and my cousins were all outside. We were playing on this zip line,
Mhm.
and I grabbed hold of it wrong or something. I basically just jumped out of the tree, and I broke my back that July, and so that was into
Wow.
my summer. But there, of course, we didn't have video games or anything back then. So all I had was a $27 guitar and a bedpan that
Mm-hmm.
I slept with all the time. And my mother would come in and teach me chords and teach me some stuff on the guitar. And I had nothing else to do with my life
Mm-hmm.
until school started. We just sitting there playing that guitar. And I got past the sore fingers, and I got to where I could make a legible noise on the guitar. And of course, that was the big blessing. My mother would say, sometimes God has to get you flat on your back to make you look up. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I heard that one.
Yeah. and that's why I broke my back. Well, what Satan meant for evil, God meant for good. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, later during the music ministry, this is where it all started from this broken back. And and then around that time was when Chick Tracts came out. And
Yep.
we
Yep.
were just all big on Chick Tracts. We gave them away for tips at restaurants, and I'm sure they appreciated that.
Yep.
Halloween, we gave them out. That was my whole knowledge of witchcraft and evolution and the demons and satanic cults and stuff like that. That's my
You
whole
did,
education.
you didn't learn about evolution in school?
Actually, my eighth grade. Well, I'm sure we had some of it in school, but my eighth grade science project was a very feeble, I'm sure, attempt to disprove evolution.
Ah,
I
okay.
actually put some of the pages out of Big Daddy Chick Tract as
Mm-hmm.
part
I
of my
remember that one. Yep.
as part of my project.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't win that year. Yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, and then the next year I actually wanted a Bible for Christmas. They started making the full Old and New Testament in a pocket-sized Bible. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted one with a zipper, and I wanted one with my name embossed on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I got. I was so proud of that. I've still got it around here somewhere, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we were just inundated. That's how life was. There was only saved and unsaved people in the whole world, and there was one atheist, Madeline Murray O'Hare. She
Mm-hmm.
was the only atheist, I guess, there was, and of course, she was Satan incarnate
Mm.
from our perspective. I mean, faith was how we knew everything we didn't know. We just believe it on faith.
Mm-hmm.
The next summer, church camp. Of course, we went every year. Assemblies of God church camp, and that's when I was filled with the Spirit, with the evidence of speaking in other tongues, or so they say. And and by this time, I'm playing a lot of music. It's all in church. It's all Christian music. And that same camp, I broke my leg playing volleyball, and of course, there's a reason for that too, because I was filled with the Spirit, and Satan was just trying to slow me down. Satan was.
Someone asked what Chick Tracts were, so I brought up this. This is
Oh,
a
okay, yeah,
picture. This is a picture of a bunch of them. There were a lot of them on all kinds of different topics. All of them were preaching Christianity. You can see near the bottom, just a little bit left of center, that one says Big Daddy. That's the one Stephen was
right.
referring to, and the anti-evolution. Um, the Creation Institute didn't exist back then. Ken Ham had not come to the United States back then. This was kind of the beginnings of the anti-science movement.
Yeah, that was even before Kent Hovind
Mm-hmm.
was preaching around. That was more in the 80s. Those came out, I think, in the 60s, early
Yeah,
70s.
yeah. The people who led me to Christ used those, and that was in the late 70s.
Yeah, there's a YouTube, and they actually. I'm trying to think what it's called, but they go through a chick track each episode, and I watch those from time to time, and I'm just like, how just utterly insane these are.
The problem was that we didn't have the internet back then, and we couldn't fact check
Exactly.
them. If we had had the internet, we would not have been taken in by this stuff.
Oh no, and I wouldn't have been 60 years in the as a Christian if there was an internet sooner. The internet had a lot to do with my deconversion.
Let's go ahead and skip forward to that. So you were, well, not quite that far yet, but let's skip forward a bit. And so you were, raised in the faith. Your parents were very into ministry. Did you ever go into professional ministry yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I got married and actually met this preacher's daughter, Assembly's of God preacher's daughter. My dad had invited this pastor to come preach at the church, and he had two daughters with him, and the one of them I spent the whole day with, of course, because they were preaching that night, and we just kind of hooked up.
Did you work 7 years for her?
10. No, we were married 10 years. No, I didn't work 7 years. We dated for a couple of years, but I was horrible with. You would think even. Well, let me put it this way. My dad was really not excited about me marrying this girl, and he even offered to pay my way to Bible college. My older brother met his wife, and he just thought if I could just get me out of the house long enough to see that there's other girls in the world. But by this time, I'd had a highly developed inferiority complex, and because one of the problems is, I think, with this religion is that they teach you that pride is the same thing as self-confidence. And self-denigration is humility, which is not a good thing to teach a kid. It wasn't an intentional thing, but that's what it ended up being. But her and I hooked up. We dated for a couple years. Only 15, and I was 17 when we married, or when we met. So once she got out of high school, then I got married, and I'd already bought a couple of houses when I was 18 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, working at a little grocery store, and and you would think that living on the farm I would know something about procreation, know something about reproduction. When we were kids, Grandpa had to shoot the old rooster because it had quit producing, and they called us in the house as my grandmother had plucked the rooster and was plucking all the BBs out of the hind end of that rooster, and asked us boys, who's been shooting the rooster? Well, all of us have. That's a mean rooster. He kept jumping up on those hens, and so we made sure that. So we made sure every time he jumped on a hen, we'd shoot that
goodness,
rooster in the rear, and this kind of carried over to my wedding night. I was a virgin. And, I never. That's one of the reasons I got married, so I could actually be with a woman finally without being grounded the rest of my life. And I remember her coming to bed our honeymoon night and going under the covers and realizing there were more orifices than I had anticipated. And I was just that naive. And the next night I was still a virgin, and finally the third night we kind of figured it out. And we figured it out pretty well because the next year we had our first, and then 4.5 years later we had our fourth. So we had 4 sons, and pretty quick.
Just like your parents had.
What's that?
Just like your parents had.
Just
They
like
had
my
4
parents,
sons
exactly. Well,
also. Yeah.
that's how life was. You have 4 kids, and life is rosy. That's just what you're called to do. And
Mhm.
and during this time, it's when I really got into writing songs. I found out I actually had a knack for writing Christian lyrics, and began a music ministry. I would go around to a lot of the churches and do a one night thing, or would do a concert, or just
Mhm.
different things. I played with other concerts, and I kind of saw the whole reason why I had these broken bones. It all came together. It was all part of God's plan, you know. And I wrote the Christmas play one year. But I did a lot of preaching back then. I was never a pastor. I would just fill in for other pastors, or my dad would let me, preach at the church now and then. Uh, but mostly I just did a music ministry,
Mhm.
and just just kind of uh, from where my dad left off with his 4 boys, and then I'm starting the same thing. Um, and it went until mainly until 70 or 86. Um, when well after our first child was born, my wife uh, uh, had her tubes tied,
Mm.
and maybe that had a lot to do with her realizing that she couldn't get pregnant. And I had a good job in the oil field, and things were going well, but she'd be gone. Uh, when I get home, she would have dinner ready, and she would have to go do something. She'd be all dolled up, and she'd go get a gallon of milk, and maybe come back 2 hours later without the
I
milk.
I'm confused. You said she had her tubes tied, and then she didn't realize that that would cause her not to
No,
be able to.
well, that's why she did it. The first 3 pregnancies were horrible.
Okay.
Not so much a pregnancy, but the delivery. They were just getting consistently worse, and I was going to get taken care of after the third child, but we were
Mhm.
just so young still. The doctor had us go home and think about it, and that week we found out we were already pregnant again.
Oh,
So
goodness.
she had determined that when she's not leaving the hospital till she's taken care of.
Mhm.
Of course, the fourth one was a breeze. She didn't even realize she'd had the baby. So it's probably a good thing. We probably would have a dozen children otherwise.
Mhm.
But she would, and I would after she'd leave the house, I would spend the afternoons doing all the housework that had been neglected all day, and taking care of the kids, and then I get to the point where I'm actually putting them in bed, and then it would get to where I'm actually in bed asleep when she would finally come home.
Mhm.
And it was just eating me up. It all culminated one night when we were just having a discussion. Basically, she's getting ready to go out again, and she's like, "Well, you think I've cheated on you?" And I know you have, but I don't know with who or when. And she just kind of waved her mascara brush at me, and, well, what if I have? And
Mm.
as soon as she said that, she came in and sat down beside me on the bed, and just told me everything I never wanted to hear.
Mhm.
And, I basically got the suitcase out and told her I'd be back, and I'd take her wherever she wanted to go. Where are you going? I'm going to go file for divorce. I don't want a divorce. Well, of course, she didn't want her dad to know.
Mhm.
Well, the whole town knew, but her dad, I think, and me. I was always the last to know. And I wasn't filing divorce so I could be divorced. I thought, well, this will be an ultimatum. This
Mhm.
will this will straighten her up pretty quick.
But it didn't.
And no, it didn't. She kept waiting for me to. She kept waiting for me to come home,
Mhm.
and or beg her to come home, and I was waiting for her to come home, and it just never happened.
Mhm.
Because I wanted her to come in and beg for forgiveness and all that, which she did 3.5 years later. But by that time, I was good. you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I lost 26 pounds in the 4 months of separation. I was eating because I was feeding children
Mm-hmm.
and learning to cook and do the laundry. And oh man, it was because I got full custody of the four boys. They were 3, 4, 6, and 8 at the time.
That's very unusual at in that time
It
period.
really was.
Yeah.
And if she had uh, even hinted that she might want the kids, she probably would have got custody of them.
Right.
But
Mm-hmm.
she was having a great time, and she had a built-in babysitter, and everybody already knew, so she might as well have a good time until I begged her to come home. And so there became my decade of being a single dad, which was my whole new identity.
Mm-hmm.
And and really, Kelly, if there had been any kind of internet back then, I'm pretty sure that have done it for me.
Mm-hmm.
I actually ran across this thing I'd written here back during that time, and it spoke about how I know he lost a wife. I kind of lost a God. I
Mm-hmm.
still talk to him like I talked to my grandmother at her graveside. But
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if he's really listening anymore.
Right. Right.
The Bible says that not even a sparrow falls without our Heavenly Father seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
But my idea of that story at the time is it just says he sees them fall. It doesn't say he
Yeah.
prevents them from falling.
He's not going to do anything about it. He's just
He
going to, oh,
doesn't.
yep,
He
there
doesn't
it
catch
is.
it. He doesn't catch it. He doesn't. He doesn't. He just lets it hit the ground. He doesn't cushion the blow. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of a heavenly Father is this that just watches it happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Watches your kid walk right off a cliff.
yeah, yeah, exactly. To just watch it happen, and I was kind of surprised when I read some of the stuff that I'd written. One of them was on specifically on God. There was a group that really helped me a lot in Amarillo. It was the Catholic diocese that held it, and it
Mm-hmm.
was and we helped people who had gone through divorce or were widowed, kind of
Mm-hmm.
the survivor of the divorce, and that really helped me a lot. But it really got me to doing a lot of writing.
Mm-hmm.
They had us write a closure letter to our spouse, whether they were passed or divorced. And then there were several subjects. One of them was the one on God, and that was one that I just read just recently, and I'm like, good grief, I should have been an atheist. And um, and if I had anybody that could give me a reason or just a hint that maybe there isn't a God,
Mm-hmm.
I would have run with it.
So what
Because
finally did do it for you? What finally made you realize that there was no God?
it was much later. It was actually once I got working in the wind industry. I was a single dad for 10 and a half years
Mm-hmm.
and was nearly had the kids out of high school. I had one of them already graduated. The other three were in high school. And I was getting ready to just, once that last one left home, I was just going to get my 57 Chevy and I was just going to go. I was just going
Mm-hmm.
to sleep in the nicest hotels or on the side of the road, just however I felt at the time. I was going to listen to my music, it was just that. And then I ran across this much younger lady, and she had two little daughters. Their dad was out of the picture. My wife was out of the picture. I was actually going to date her mother, but I ended up dating her. And we ended up getting married. And that's been a really great marriage. We're not married now. We were married 20
So you
years.
raised another family.
I did well. Not only that, after we got the girls in school, then we had another son. So it was kind
Mm-hmm.
of a third family,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of wish we'd had one more. Because that poor baby boy basically had three mothers.
Uh-huh.
Those girls were just at that age where they were bossier than their mom was. But so I ended up working in the wind industry, and we were going to work local. The two largest wind farms are right here where I live, and and I went to work. I was working with GE, and a new company came along, which I wouldn't have even given them a second look, except the two guys that were working there, the only other two techs, brand new company, had recommended me to come to work for them. And because they recommended me, I gave it a second look. And they had a lot of training lined up because they didn't have any. As a matter of fact, I was their third employee. They didn't have any contracts or anything at the time. And they sent us all around the country to all these different trainings. That's one of the main reasons I took the job, because it's just because of the training. And then our first contract was in Iowa in February, and I was never home after that. I traveled the whole country, and from one job to the other, which had a lot to do with the reason I'm not married now. But during this time, I had to learn how to work a computer. Being my age, I didn't grow up with this technology. My wife was actually a computer teacher, but she had given up on teaching me anything about technology and dancing. She never could teach me how to dance. I was just
you have two left feet.
Like an old white guy. That's how I move. And but I ran across the YouTube, and at night it was hard for me to sleep because I didn't have a wife that could just read to me on nights I couldn't sleep, and she'd read in the middle of a book, middle of a sentence, and I would go right to sleep. And we grew up listening to music all night long, and so I started listening to just different YouTube things that interested me, and a lot of things that I didn't really know about. A lot of science stuff, and along the way, it just dawned on me that, well, Noah's Ark didn't happen. That it couldn't have happened. And matter of fact, I was kind of like Paula Gia. It was like Ken Ham, talked me out of that whole concept of young Earth creationist.
Really?
Yes.
What did Ken Ham say that made you realize that young Earth creationism was?
Well, it wasn't just him. It was just when they decided that they were going to prove scientifically that the Earth is 6,000 years old, and historically, the Earth is 6,000 years. It was like, that doesn't make any sense at all. It dawned on me that I don't remember in history class, and I was good at history in school. I don't remember where all the civilizations ended 4,500 years ago, and then they immediately took up a year later. Little by little, they spread from the Middle East. I'm like, I don't think that really happened. Egypt just quit building their pyramids and immediately came back to working on them.
Yeah.
Things like that. Because I still had that chick tract mentality, So I wonder about, witchcraft. I wonder about all these other religions. That was another thing that I was curious about. And of all things, I'd gotten to the point where I got, of course, the Bible speaks against astrology, and which kind of struck me as odd because, that's why the stars were made. In Genesis 1:14, it talks about he made the stars for signs. The three wise men, they would follow the star to find the cross child, but everywhere else, and I knew that all the other religions had a lot to do with astrology, all the pagan religions. And then I'm looking at maybe Christianity, maybe the Bible's a pagan religion.
Mm-hmm.
Everything to do with the birth and the 12 disciples and the cross, which resembles the cross of the zodiac. There's just so much. And I was literally in a hotel in Fort Stockton, Texas, listening to one more video, and it just dawned on me like none of this is true.
Mm.
I can accept the old earth Christianity. I can somehow, accept all these other things, but it was just the moment. It could have been anything, but that just happened to be what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'd had this back in '86 when I was going through a divorce, I could have saved 30 years
Yeah.
of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
back then, like I mentioned earlier, the internet's where Christianity goes to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back before that, you didn't have anybody really honest to tell you about it. I mean, my dad was the preacher. Of course, if I had questions, I'd go to my dad. But a lot of people don't even have that. They have their priest or their pastor that they're loosely associated with, and
They're excusagist.
yeah, they'll tell you what you want to hear,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or what you need to hear to keep the faith.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And shortly after, and during that time, my mother started showing the signs of dementia,
Mm.
and it was getting pretty bad. We were allowing them to stay home, and because
Allowing who to stay home?
my parents, my
You mean
parents,
stay in your home?
no, stay in their own home.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes, my dad was still very he still had all of his senses.
So your parents were still around when you lost your faith.
They were, yes.
I'm mainly surprised because you're 4 years. You mentioned how old you are, and you're 4 years older than I am. And so yeah, are your parents still alive?
No.
Okay.
That's kind of what I was getting to. I think it'd be a good place to
Okay.
end this. My mother started, showing signs of dementia in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad, his whole reason to living at this time, he would preach whenever, but he had retired as a pastor. But his whole purpose in life was to take care of my mom. That was his
Mm-hmm.
whole calling in life. And in 2017, which actually the year that I realized that I was an atheist,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
he had trouble keeping his balance.
Mm.
He went pretty quickly to a cane, and then to a walker, then a wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, he turned out he was eaten up with cancer, and it was a lot of it was in his head, and this was pretty rough time. My brothers and I, we would spend a week apiece just staying with them at the house, and the last week that they were actually at home, I was with them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm having to bathe my dad and help him around, get him up, and just everything. Having to do everything for him.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of time to talk, and I didn't bring up the fact that I no longer believed, because
I kind of thought you might have. Yeah, that was my big question, but that
would have just broke his heart. I mean, it
yeah.
really, and it served no purpose. And I'm much more compassionate,
Right. Mm-hmm.
much more compassionate than the God he served.
Mm-hmm.
And he would still, I'd walk into there at night, and he'd be praying for his healing.
Mm-hmm.
He had this thought that he could just blow his nose and all that cancer would come out. And he did not, he did not want to go to the nursing home. And but the week after I left, my cousin, the one that the first cousin that stayed with us, came and stayed with him for maybe 2 days, and it got to the point where she couldn't handle it. And so a couple of my sons and my little brother just put them both in the nursing home. We knew Dad just had just weeks to live.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it'd be better to put them in the nursing home and push their beds together and let them spend the rest of their time and not having to worry about anything, but just being together. By this time, my mom was in bad shape. So when it came time, my younger brother and he would stay there 12 hours a day, and I would be with my dad 12 hours a night.
Mm-hmm.
And the night he passed, I remember being on the side of his bed, holding his arm, and middle of the night. And the only things I would say to God at this time is, so this is how you treat your children. This mighty man of God who was in your service all this time. This was your best plan.
Yep.
This was it. He's gonna leave my mother by herself, and all he wants to do is be there for her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I wasn't already an atheist, this would have done it. And I surprised you, like my brothers. They would, well, Mom, we know God knows best. And I'm sitting over across the room thinking, no, he doesn't know best. This is the worst thing that could happen to my parents. And I was with him when he took his last breath, and I waited till my it's 4 a.m. So when my mom got up to go to the restroom, I jumped up and turned the light, verified that he had passed, and got the nurse in, and she left, did what she needed to do. And my mom came out, and I sat there on the side of the bed and told her that Dad had passed. And we talked for probably 2 hours. I called my younger brother, told him that Dad had passed. And she'd reach back and pat his hand and just talk. And we visited for 2 hours about life and everything. Mm-hmm. And I don't even know if she knew I was one of her sons. She didn't know which one.
Mm-hmm.
My little brother got there and took her into the hallway. And 2 minutes later, about 6 o'clock in the morning, 2 minutes later, my mom was, I need to tell ZA that you're here. And we've been in there for 2 hours. So basically, this loving father left my mom. Right. And so the rest of her life, every few minutes, she would lose her husband all over again.
Yeah.
They were married 67 years. Mm-hmm. And my little brother, ZA's gone, Mom. Dad's gone. And but God knows best, and I you don't know how to respond to that. I certainly never told her. I was with her in April.
Right.
Past. Mm-hmm. I was holding her face like this when she took her last few breaths because I was having trouble hearing her. Mm-hmm. My younger brother was there also. And so my dad's funeral, that's the first time I'd gone to a funeral, somebody I loved, and just knew that, that was it. That was the end.
Yeah.
And I just still wonder to this day how my brothers just, are still, a couple of them are still young earth creationists, probably all three of them. But
do they know you're an atheist?
Well, I haven't told them. Mm-hmm. The last time my older brother was here, we got discussing some stuff about young earth, and it got to a point, I don't know if I want to go beyond that because, I mentioned that, well, good grief, the plants were here before the sun. Mm-hmm. And he was like, well, I'm
only
sure
for a day. They could live for a whole day without the sun.
I'm sure God could keep them warm for a day, Stephen. And I'm like, okay. I just kind of let it go and went on to something else because I value their, and I really don't know what kind of relationship we would have if they found out that I was an atheist.
Well, they wouldn't necessarily need to in the beginning. I mean, you could start with showing them that there's a lot of people that are Christians that are not young earthers.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, they all live pretty far from me. They're all in Texas, but Texas is a big state.
Texas is a big state.
I don't see them.
I remember reading Michener saying that that El Paso is closer to the Pacific Ocean than it is to Houston, and Houston is closer to the Atlantic Ocean than it is to El Paso. That's how big Texas is.
Yeah, you flip it over, and Brownwood would be up in Canada. So, yeah, it's a big state. But yeah, I'm pretty content. I told my ex-wife, we still get along. We get along very well. We still do vacations and stuff together. Still working on my bucket list. I've got to do a lot of neat things in my life. I've gone shark cage diving in Africa and jumped off the high-speed bridge and went gold painting in Alaska. Just went paragliding in the Alps in Switzerland earlier this year. Just having an exciting life. Got my first tattoo, so I guess I'm an official sinner now. And it was just basically nothing but here's to life. And that's what it is. Once you're not worried about, no longer worried about the sweet by and by, and all you're going to have is a sweet here and now.
Right.
And here's to life.
And that's the whole point of my theme, live your life, is this is the only one you've got. Exactly. And I don't really, matter of fact, even now, I'm glad there's no heaven. If there was a choice between the two, I would go to heaven, but I really don't even want that. Right. It just, the monotony, what do you learn? Why would you bother getting out? Well, you'd be all time worshiping God. It was a big thing I used to think when I was a teenager. I don't know if I want to spend my whole eternity just in a praise and worship service. Yeah. Any God that's triomni, it wouldn't really do anything for him. Just to be right. Matter of fact, I've been compiling a list of the reasons I could just never be a Christian. I've got about 21 now. Of course, the moral argument. There's so many things that I've compiled. I was on Facebook recently, and of course, there's always just visiting with Christians, and I'm very, very polite and very kind. I've never cursed or anything. It just never seemed to be the thing to do. And usually, if you do that, wherever you are in that conversation, that's the end of it for them. They one F-bomb and they're no longer interested in talking to you. But they're always trying to the gotcha question. Well, why did you leave? Specifically, it was Bill, and I mentioned this or that, and finally I just put this succinct list of 21 things, and I just copied and pasted them right to Facebook. And then he was like, well, that's just a list of straw men. No, that's the reason I left. I can't, say if that's the reason for that you would leave Christianity, but you want to know why I left. This is why. And I think I'm thinking about to the end of it. Of course, the science and the fact that a Christian's health and wealth and longevity is non-distinguishable from atheist. And that's a promise, Well, we are out of time, believe it or not. And I think this is a good place to end, because I think we've come to the current state of your life, and it has been really great getting to know you.
That's where I am now. It was good to meet you.
Yes, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Steven, getting to know a godless grandpa. Next week, my guest is going to be Lucas Hunt, who's going to be bringing us another perspective on mythicism. And I don't even know what this perspective is. I think he's indicated he's somewhere between Dr. Richard Carrier and the people who totally reject mythicism, but I'm not sure exactly where he's going to fall in that. So that should be interesting as well. Thank you, Steven, for coming. It's been great getting to know you.
Thank you.
Okay. And everyone, catch you next week and live your life.